Toxic mother manipulates my life and tells my boyfriend to break up with me. I'm pregnant with his child. Hi everyone, I'm Violet. I've always prided myself on being strong and independent, qualities I had to develop early on thanks to growing up with a mother who loved control more than comfort. Now, at 28, I thought I had all my ducks in a row. A good job, a great apartment, and a good relationship. But life, as they say, laughs when you make plans. Recently, my world got turned upside down. I found out I'm pregnant. The news hit me like a ton of bricks, not just because it was unexpected, but because it brought all my deepest fears to the surface. More than anything, I've been terrified of turning into my mother, Helen, whose idea of parenting was more about dictating than nurturing. The thought of possibly repeating her mistakes with my own child has been haunting me every day and night since I saw those 2 little lines on the test. Telling Eric, my boyfriend, seemed like it would be the hardest part until I actually said the words. His reaction was supportive at first, or so it seemed, but then he suggested considering all our options, including not keeping the baby. That conversation didn't just crack the foundation of our relationship, it blew it wide open. Now, here I am, trying to navigate through a maze of emotions, from deciding whether to keep the baby to dealing with my mother's suffocating interference once she caught wind of the news. This isn't just a story about an unexpected pregnancy. It's about confronting past demons, wrestling with present decisions, and trying desperately not to be swallowed whole by the fear of what kind of future lies ahead for me and this baby. So, I turned to this forum, not just to share my story, but to maybe find some solidarity or wisdom from others who might have walked a similar path. Who knows? Maybe along the way, I'll figure out not just how to handle being a parent, but how to heal the child still inside me, the one that never quite got over having a mother like Helen. The day I decided to keep the baby, I felt a mix of fear and defiance. Eric's hesitant support had stung more than I'd anticipated, and as I looked into his uncertain eyes, I knew I was stepping into largely uncharted territory for both of us. He agreed to stand by my decision, but I could sense his reservations hanging in the air, an unspoken tension that started to build walls between us. Telling my mother, Helen, was something I approached with even greater trepidation. Her influence over my life had waned since I moved out, but her ability to unsettle me had not diminished. I invited her over to my apartment, setting the stage for a conversation I knew would be anything but easy. When I told her about the pregnancy, the look on her face was a mix of shock and, unexpectedly, disapproval. "Violet, are you sure you're ready for this? Being a parent isn't just another project you can manage," she said, her tone implying she had doubts about my capabilities. I bristled at her words, feeling the old familiar flare of rebellion. "I'm not you, Mom. I know I can do this, and I can do it better. I want to be a different kind of mother than you were." Helen's eyes narrowed slightly, hurt flashing through them before she masked it with her usual composure. "You think you can just choose to be different? It's not that simple, Violet. You'll see. Parenting changes you in ways you can't imagine." Her words, meant to be a warning, only fueled my resolve. I wanted to prove her wrong, to show that I could break the cycle she had started. But as she left my apartment that day, her skeptical look lingered in my mind, planting seeds of doubt I fought hard to ignore. The next few weeks were a roller coaster. Eric's detachment grew more pronounced as the reality of the impending baby settled in. Our conversations about the future were strained, filled with pauses and uncertainties. It felt as though every discussion was laced with an undercurrent of his unspoken wish to revisit the option of not keeping the baby. Amidst navigating my rocky relationship, I sought prenatal care, a step that felt both terrifying and empowering. The first ultrasound was a milestone. Seeing the tiny heartbeat flickering on the screen made everything real. I was going to be a mother, regardless of the swirling chaos around me. However, as my pregnancy progressed, so did my isolation. Eric came to fewer appointments, and discussions about the baby led to more arguments than plans. One evening, after a particularly tense disagreement, Eric admitted his heart wasn't fully in this path we were on. "I don't know if I can do this, Violet. I'm not ready to be a father," he confessed, the resignation in his voice cutting deeper than if he had shouted. His words felt like a betrayal, yet they didn't shock me as they might have weeks earlier. I realized I had been bracing for this, preparing myself for the possibility of doing it alone. "If that's how you feel, then maybe it's best if you take a step back," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Eric agreed, and although he didn't move out immediately, the distance between us in our small apartment felt like miles. As I lay in bed that night, listening to his uneven breaths, I felt the first real pangs of being alone. The journey ahead loomed large, filled with unknowns, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the fear and loneliness that came with my decision. Yet, beneath that, there was a flicker of something else. Determination. I would be a mother, and I would give this child the love and stability I had craved, no matter what it took. As my pregnancy progressed, and Eric's presence began to fade into the background of my life, my mother's became more pronounced. Helen's initial skepticism about my ability to handle motherhood didn't wane. If anything, it intensified. She started to visit more frequently, each time with unsolicited advice and thinly veiled critiques about my choices and lifestyle. One afternoon, she arrived unannounced, her arms laden with baby books and maternity clothes. "I thought you might need these," she said, her tone implying that I hadn't prepared enough. As she bustled around my apartment, rearranging my living space to make it more suitable for a baby, I felt the old teenage defiance rising within me. "Mom, I appreciate the help, but I have my own ideas about how to raise my child," I tried to assert, hoping to set some boundaries. Helen paused, fixing me with a look that was both concerned and condescending. "Violet, you've never been a mother. I have. I'm just trying to help you avoid making mistakes." The implication that I was bound to fail without her guidance stung, and our conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument. "I need to make my own choices, Mom. I'm not you, and I don't want to be," I retorted, frustration coloring my words. Helen left in a huff, her parting words a sharp reminder of our fraught relationship. "You'll see, Violet. You'll need me." Her words echoed in my mind long after she'd gone. Despite my resolve to do things differently, there was a part of me that wondered if she was right. The fear of repeating her mistakes haunted me, and with each passing day, my confidence wavered. Eric's withdrawal didn't help. As he became more a ghost than a partner, my mother's visits became my primary connection to someone who knew my situation. I felt caught between my need for independence and my growing anxiety about facing motherhood alone. One particularly difficult day, I found myself calling Helen for support after a challenging doctor's appointment. She came, and for a moment, her presence was a comfort. But it wasn't long before her advice turned into directives, her support conditional on my willingness to follow her lead. As my due date approached, Helen's interference reached new levels. She began making decisions without consulting me, from setting up the nursery to speaking to my doctor about the birth plan. "I've arranged for a private nurse to help you after the birth," she announced one day, presenting it as a done deal. "Helen, I didn't ask for this. I need to make my own arrangements," I protested, feeling overwhelmed and cornered. Her response was curt, a mixture of irritation and obstinance. "You're not in a position to know what you'll need, Violet. I'm just making sure you're taken care of." The final straw came when I learned that Helen had been discussing my pregnancy and personal choices with other family members, painting a picture of me as naive and unprepared. The betrayal hurt deeply, more so because it came from a place of maternal concern twisted into control. Feeling betrayed and smothered, I confronted her with a firmness I hadn't mustered before. "Mom, you need to stop. I appreciate your concern, but you're overstepping. I need space to make my own decisions, to learn from my own experiences." Helen was taken aback by my assertiveness. "Fine," she said sharply, her voice cold. "Handle it your way. See where that gets you." With that, she walked out, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts and a growing sense of isolation. As I stood in the quiet of my apartment, I realized that setting boundaries with Helen might mean facing motherhood without her support. It was a daunting prospect, but necessary. I was determined to forge my path, to build a different kind of relationship with my child, one based on love and respect, not control and fear. The distance between Helen and me grew after our confrontation. I was adamant about enforcing the boundaries I had set, a decision that brought me peace, but also a profound sense of loneliness. As my pregnancy advanced, the realization that I might truly be doing this alone, without Eric's involvement or my mother's support, began to weigh heavily on me. Eric's detachment became more pronounced as time passed. He came home later each night, and our interactions became perfunctory, strained by unspoken regrets and unresolved tensions. The emotional gap that had started as a small crack was now a gaping chasm, filled with all the things we no longer said to each other. One evening, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "Eric, we need to talk about us, about where this is going," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He sighed, a sound of resignation that seemed to echo around our small living room. "Violet, I'm not sure I can do this. I've been thinking a lot, and maybe it's best if I move out," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. His words were not unexpected, but they stung nonetheless. The finality of his decision hung in the air, dense and suffocating. "I understand," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The pain of his impending departure was sharp, but part of me felt relieved that at least one aspect of my life was reaching a resolution, even if it wasn't the one I had hoped for. As Eric began packing his things over the next few days, the apartment felt increasingly empty, both physically and emotionally. His presence, once a source of comfort, had become another symbol of my failed attempts at building the family I had envisioned. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mother remained strained. Despite the distance, her influence lingered like a shadow, coloring my thoughts and decisions. When I found out she had been speaking to Eric behind my back, advising him on what was best, my sense of betrayal deepened. Confronting him, I demanded the truth. "Your mother thinks it's better for both of us if I step back now, before the baby arrives," Eric confessed. His admission hurt, but it clarified the dynamic that had been developing over the past few months. My mother's interference had not only undermined my decisions, but had also contributed to the disintegration of my relationship with Eric. Feeling isolated and betrayed, I confronted Helen with a fury I hadn't known I possessed. "How could you do this? How could you manipulate my life like this?" I shouted, the pain and anger boiling over. Helen was defensive, justifying her actions as necessary interventions. "I was trying to protect you, Violet, from making a mistake, from a life harder than it needs to be," she argued, but her words only fueled my resolve to push her away. The fallout was messy and emotional. Eric moved out shortly after, leaving me to face the last weeks of my pregnancy alone. Helen, stung by my accusations and my insistence on independence, withdrew, her calls and visits becoming less frequent. In this newfound solitude, I grappled with the realities of my situation. I was about to become a single mother, a role I felt woefully unprepared for despite my determination. The apartment, once filled with the promise of shared dreams, now echoed with the silence of my solitude. As my due date approached, I poured my energy into preparing for the baby, focusing on the practical necessities to distract from my emotional turmoil. I attended prenatal classes alone, decorated the nursery by myself, and read every book I could find on single parenting. Each step was a small assertion of my capability, a way to reaffirm to myself that I could do this, even alone. Yet, in the quiet moments, doubts crept in. The fear of becoming like my mother, of not being enough for my child, of failing at the very role I had fought so hard to claim as my own, haunted me. The loneliness of my journey seemed to magnify these fears, turning them into constant companions as I awaited the arrival of my child, the only surety in a life that had become unrecognizable. The final weeks of my pregnancy were marked by a deepening solitude. With Eric gone and my relationship with Helen hanging by a thread, the days stretched long and lonely. Each morning, I found myself speaking to the little life growing inside me, my words a mix of encouragement and apologies, for the imperfect world awaiting them, and for my fears that I might not be enough. My professional life, once a source of pride and escape, began to suffer under the weight of my personal struggles. Concentration became increasingly difficult as the reality of my impending single parenthood pressed in on me. One day, after forgetting to attend a crucial team meeting, my supervisor called me aside. His expression was a mixture of concern and professional frustration. "Violet, I know you're going through a lot right now, but you need to decide if you're going to take a leave of absence," he suggested gently. "It might be best for you and the team." His words, though kind, felt like another blow, another piece of my old life slipping away. Reluctantly, I agreed to his suggestion. Walking out of the office that day, my briefcase lighter than usual, I felt untethered, as if even my career, the one thing I thought was still under my control, was slipping through my fingers. Home became my sanctuary and my prison. I spent hours online, poring over parenting forums and blogs, searching for stories of women who had navigated similar paths, looking for some sign that I could do this on my own. While I found stories of triumph, each success story seemed to highlight my own insecurities and fears. My interactions with Helen during this time were fraught and infrequent. Each phone call or visit ended in tears or arguments. "You need to let me help you, Violet," she would insist, her voice a mixture of desperation and command. "You're not in any state to do this alone." But I was determined to prove her wrong, to prove to myself that I could be a different kind of mother than she had been. "I have to do this my way, Mom," I found myself saying repeatedly, a mantra that was both empowering and isolating. As the delivery date approached, the reality of what my life was becoming grew clearer. Friends who had promised to be there drifted away, uncomfortable with the messiness of my circumstances. I watched from my window as the world went on outside, families and couples sharing moments I once thought would be mine. The sense of isolation deepened, the walls of my apartment echoing back my own fears and doubts. One evening, overcome by a wave of loneliness and anxiety, I experienced what I first thought were just nerves, but soon realized were the early signs of labor. Sitting alone in my living room, timing contractions, the full weight of my situation hit me. I was about to go into labor, about to bring a child into the world, and I had never felt so alone. I drove myself to the hospital, a bag hastily packed beside me. The nurses, kind and efficient, settled me into a room, their faces a blend of professional concern and personal empathy. "Is someone coming to be with you?" one of them asked softly. "No, it's just me," I replied, trying to mask my fear with a semblance of bravery. The nurse squeezed my hand gently, her silent support a small comfort in the sterile brightness of the delivery room. As the hours of labor progressed, each contraction seemed to echo the broader pains of the past months, the betrayals, the losses, the isolation. When my daughter was finally born, her first cries were not just a signal of her arrival, but a clarion call to my new life, a life that was now irrevocably changed. Holding her for the first time, I felt a fierce love surge through me, mingled with a terrifying realization. I was a mother now, and though I had fought to get here on my own terms, the path ahead was daunting. The hospital room, filled with the sounds of my daughter's soft breathing, felt like a tiny island in a sea of uncertainty. I was alone, truly alone, in a way I had never been before. The joy of her arrival was tinged with a profound, unsettling solitude that I knew would be my constant companion in the days to come. Bringing my newborn daughter home should have been a moment filled with joy and new beginnings. Instead, as I crossed the threshold of my apartment, clutching her tiny form close to my chest, the silence that greeted us was stark. This was not the homecoming I had envisioned during the many nights I lay awake, imagining life as a mother. There were no family members bustling about, no partner to share the profound weight of this new responsibility. It was just me and her, alone together. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless days. My daughter Mia became my world, her needs dictating my every action. Yet, the exhaustion brought on by caring for her was nothing compared to the emotional strain I felt. Each time I looked into Mia's eyes, so innocent and dependent, I was reminded of the solitude of our little family, the weight of being her sole caretaker, without the buffer of a supportive partner or a nurturing mother, pressed down on me with a relentless gravity. I tried to reach out to Helen, hoping that perhaps the arrival of her granddaughter might soften the tension between us. But the conversations were strained, the old patterns of control and criticism quickly resurfacing. "You look tired, Violet. Are you sure you're coping?" Helen would say, her words dripping with doubt and veiled concern. Each call left me more drained, more defensive, more isolated. As the weeks turned into months, the isolation turned into something darker. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me, the stacks of baby bottles and laundry piling up like monuments to my overwhelm. Friends stopped calling, perhaps tired of hearing my tired voice always on the verge of tears. I was drowning, yet I was too proud, too determined, to ask for the help I so desperately needed. One cold evening, as I tried to soothe a particularly fussy Mia, my phone rang. It was Eric. His name on the caller ID sparked a flicker of hope, a desperate wish for a lifeline. But as I answered, his words were a cold dash of reality. "Violet, I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything. I think it's best if we finalize our separation legally. I want to start fresh, and I think you should too," Eric said, his voice calm and resolute. His words hit me like a physical blow. The final thread of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he might come back, might want to be a family, was severed. "I understand," I managed to say, my voice hollow, the phone slipping slightly as my grip loosened. Hanging up, I looked around at the small, cluttered space that was now the center of my universe. The loneliness enveloped me, a tangible presence that mocked my every effort to be strong, to be enough for my daughter. That night, as I finally got Mia to sleep and lay down on my own bed, the tears that I had held back for months came pouring out. They were tears of grief, for the life I had lost, for the partner I had hoped Eric would be, tears of rage, at Helen, at Eric, at the unfairness of it all, and tears of sheer, utter exhaustion. The breaking point was quiet, a silent acknowledgement in the dark, tear-streaked hours of the morning. I realized then that I could not do this alone, not because I was weak, but because no one is meant to carry such burdens single-handedly. The next morning, I called a postpartum support line, my voice shaking as I asked for help for the first time. It was both the hardest and the most necessary decision I had made since Mia's birth. As I awaited the callback, I cradled Mia in my arms, her tiny hand gripping my finger. The path ahead was uncertain, likely still filled with challenges and solitude, but I had taken the first step toward breaking the cycle of isolation. I had reached out, chosen to try and pierce the loneliness with a call for help. It was not the solution to all my problems, but it was a start, a fragile thread of connection cast into the vastness of my small enclosed world.